How's that, guys? Can you hear me good? Okay. So my name is Ron Riley. I have been with Citizens Climate Lobby here in Hilo since its first meeting, which is September 2nd. So we're only 3 months into, I am 3 months into understanding something about Citizens Climate Lobby. And what I can tell you is it's an exciting website and an exciting organization that has about 80,000 members, and it is represented around the world with about a dozen countries. The mission of Citizens Climate Lobby, CCL for short, is right there on the wall. And it is to create the political will for climate solutions. And that's really important to me because a lot of people focus and complain about the problems of climate change. The hurricane here, the wildfire there, the flooding there. CCL is focused on a solution. Further to that, they are focused on enabling individuals to have breakthroughs in their personal and political power. Now, what in the heck does that mean? Well, I can tell you what it means for me. Prior to September, I did not know for sure which congressional district I was in. Turns out to be Congressional District 2. I did not know for sure who my congressional representatives were. Turns out I'd heard the names, but I wasn't for sure. Tulsi Gabbard, Brian Schatz. Okay, that's 2. Number 3, I did not have ready access to their phone numbers or their email addresses for both their Washington and their Honolulu office. Okay? Number 4, I had never called their office or sent them an email prior to September. And number 5, I had never established a personal relationship with their staff. Now I have done all of those things. So I think Citizens Climate Lobby has helped enable me to have a little mini breakthrough in personal and political power. Why is that important for me, and I hope for you, is when you have power as a constituent, it feeds back to the top, which is creating the political will for a climate solution. Right? So that's a feedback loop. And the climate solution, as Merle is going to explain to you, is carbon fee and dividend. And there's a little chart there on the wall that needs some explanation about how that all works. So I'm excited about it. Hope you are too. And I'd like to turn it over to Merle.
It's so good to see all of you here today. Thank you for braving the weather. When I began to help my first granddaughter to go to college, I wondered about her future, her having children, making a family and a life, planning for retirement. But all of this was veiled by the cloud of climate change. And Al Gore says that when your world is in danger, you've got to speak up. So in seeking workable solutions for climate change to reverse global warming, I found this book by Paul Hawken, who's a friend of mine from the 60s. And in it are initiatives from by individuals, communities, businesses, governments, all around the world to help begin to draw down the CO2, the carbon dioxide, in the atmosphere. And some of the things that they are doing are, we know this one, increasing wind, solar, hydro, power development, improving industrial efficiency and appliance efficiency, restoring degraded forests and agricultural land, trapping methane from oil and gas extraction, improving transportation technology and fuels, shifting to electric vehicles, designing sustainable buildings. China's doing a big job on this. Managing cropland soil, using CO2 to make electricity, and sucking CO2 out of the atmosphere to use in greenhouse agriculture. So these are all, very creative projects, but they really are not enough. They're having some effect as the transition to energy technologies has reduced carbon, atmospheric CO2. And this year, transportation has bypassed electricity production to become the highest polluting factor. And like I said, it's not enough, and that's why we're working on finding a solution that I'll tell you about today. So, are you concerned about climate change? Yeah, it looks like everybody. How many believe that citizen action can make a difference? Okay, most of us, great. I'm going to tell you about Citizens Climate Lobby and about a solution that all of us can easily get involved in to begin to reverse the effects of climate change. So here we are, the forming members. I say August, but he says September. Anyway, it was this year. And Citizens Climate Lobby is a nonpartisan organization. It has hundreds of chapters across the U.S. and on every continent. And this is our mission: to create the political will for climate solutions by enabling individual breakthroughs in personal and political power. There are more than 7 billion humans on Earth, and society is based on the assumption of a stable climate. However, the climate is changing faster than ever before in human history, and that kind of stresses our ability to adapt. Many of us worry about future generations and how climate change will affect them, but we don't know what to do. All the things we know that will come from climate change: sea level rise, floods, droughts, food shortages, toxic air pollution, extreme weather, massive wildfires that we saw this past year, are things that are impacting humans now. So CO2 is increasing in the environment, but is fossil fuel responsible for the rising global temperatures that are causing extreme weather events? Research has shown that fossil fuel carbon has a different isotopic composition than inorganic carbon. And climate scientists have identified and confirmed that it is fossil fuel carbon they're finding in the atmosphere and in sea coral and tree rings around the world. Fossil fuel CO2 reduces oxygen in the air, prevents heat from escaping back into space, and traps more heat in the lower atmosphere. And scientists have confirmed these conditions too. According to the United Nations annual audit, greenhouse gas emissions are on course to be about 30% above the 2030 global target. So that's far above the threshold for averting the dangerous 2 degrees Celsius rise in temperature. Even the collective agreements from the Paris, collective commitments under the Paris Agreement, excluding the US, are only about 1/3 of the level needed to keep global temperatures from increasing more than 2 degrees Celsius. Okay, so here we are at home. This video shows how climate change and the warming ocean are affecting Hawaii now. So Waikiki is built over wetlands, and there are hundreds of cesspools in that area that will spill raw sewage into street water and onto the beaches during these regular seawater incursions. It has been projected that all of Waikiki back up to the Alawai Canal will be lost to the rising sea. UH researchers are recommending that high-rise owners in that area sacrifice their basements and first floors as seawater level rises. We're going to need some gondolas, eh? During extreme weather events, not only will seawater rise through the ground, but flooding rains will overwhelm flood control systems. And there will be no place to send that water. You know, it's just going to sit there, depending on how high the sea is. This year, Governor Ige signed Act 32, making climate change a priority issue because of immediate and long-term threats to Hawaii's economy, security, sustainability, and way of life, and also to commit to the Paris Agreement. However, some local agencies are still creating new policies that ignore this act. And that is one reason why we must act to curb the release of fossil fuel carbon into the atmosphere with an effective national solution for the sake of all of us. So it's just not the South Pacific, you know, that's being run over by the sea. We're going to be seeing that soon enough. And the UH researchers have an app that you can download, and if you see any coastal inundation, you can take a picture and send it to them. Citizens Climate Lobby's founder,
Okay, technical difficulties.
You get a minute, there you go.
there you go. Okay, so Citizens Climate Lobby's founder, Marshall Sanders, shows us the way to take back our future. He used to think that important people were taking care of important problems, but he doesn't think that anymore. He's been lobbying his representatives on various issues for many years, and this is his message to us. Ordinary people like you and me have to organize, educate ourselves, give up our hopelessness and powerlessness, and gain the skills to be effective with our government. When we learn that each of us can make a significant difference in this world, we become powerful and hopeful. So empowered individuals joining together with others on big and effective moments can actually change government policy. Our Polynesian navigator, Nainoa Thompson, said, "Every journey begins with a vision that can unite others. When people come together around a set of shared values, they can achieve extraordinary things." A key component of CCL's approach is bipartisan legislation. So CCL helped to form a Climate Solutions Caucus in 2016. to create climate solution legislation by building upon shared values rather than partisan divides, to work towards adopting fair, effective, and sustainable climate change solutions. The 62-member House of Representatives Climate Solutions Caucus has an equal number of Democrats and Republicans. So in order to join the caucus, a representative must bring in a partner from the opposite party. So that's quite a growth rate, huh? 62 since 2016. These are the present caucus members. When joining the Climate Solutions Caucus, California Democrat Pete Aguilar said, "Climate change is real, it's here and it's deadly. We are past the time for action, and I'm proud to join my colleagues on the Climate Solutions Caucus to seek a meaningful solution to this global problem. This is an issue that extends beyond party lines, so I'm glad that we'll be able to work in a bipartisan way to find real solutions." This photo was taken at Citizens' Annual Climate Lobbying Day in Washington. One of the things local chapters like ours do is to send representatives for a day of lobbying Congress in Washington and on a bipartisan solution to climate change that will reduce atmospheric carbon emissions from fossil fuels. In 2014, the ratio of productive versus hostile reactions to the climate change solution was 3-1. This year, after this year's lobbying day in November, the ratio improved 20-1. 20 times as many Republican offices were clearly interested in CCL's message as offices who were clearly hostile, making that about 278 House and Senate Republicans out of 292 of 2017's congressional Republicans. Pretty good progress. So do you like TED Talks? This is a TED Talk explaining the concept of carbon fee and dividend by Ted Halstead of the Climate Leadership Council. It is this concept that CCL is promoting. So pay particular attention to his point about the current administration's reversal of pollution regulations as being the first moves in a complex game of climate chess. The rollback of pollution regulations can be frightening for those of us who witness polluted air, poisoned waterways, toxic dump sites across the country in the 60s, and for generations who campaigned to put these safeguards in place. But Ted is telling us that these reversals are revving up people and companies on the front line of climate change to demand solutions. That transforms our anxiety into hope. He also mentions true cost pricing, putting a price on the carbon content of fossil fuels to account for social and environmental costs. That's a really long-awaited concept.
Whoops. Try the same, I don't know about. Try that one.
High tech. High tech. I'm addicted to high tech.
It's a low tech.
Low tech.
Wait, what is that?
Yeah.
Slow Wi-Fi? What is low tech?
Both high tech and no tech are required for a full life. I have a 2-year-old daughter named Naya, who's under the mistaken impression that this conference is named in honor of her father. Who am I to contradict my baby girl? As many of you know, there's something about becoming a parent that concentrates the mind on long-term problems like climate change. It was the birth of my daughter that inspired me to launch this climate organization in order to counteract the excessive polarization of this issue in the United States and to find a conservative pathway forward. Yes, folks, a Republican climate solution is possible. And you know what? It may even be better. Let me try to prove that to you. What we really need is a killer app to climate policy. In the technology world, a killer app is an application so transformative that it creates its own market, like Uber. In the climate world, a killer app is a new solution so promising that it can break through the seemingly insurmountable barriers to progress. These include the psychological barrier. Climate advocates have long been encouraging their fellow citizens to make short-term sacrifices now for benefits that accrue to other people in other countries 30 or 40 years in the future. It just doesn't fly because it runs contrary to basic human nature. Next is the geopolitical barrier. Under the current rules of global trade, countries have a strong incentive to free ride off the emissions reductions of other nations instead of strengthening their own programs. This has been the curse of every international climate negotiations, including Paris. Finally, we have the partisan barrier. Even the most committed countries, Germany, the United Kingdom, Canada, are nowhere near reducing emissions at the required scale and speed, not even close. And the partisan climate divide is far more acute here in the United States. We are fundamentally stuck, and that is why we need a killer app of climate policy to break through each of these barriers. I'm convinced that the road to climate progress in the United States runs through the Republican Party and the business community. So in launching the Climate Leadership Council, I started by reaching out to a who's who of Republican elder statesmen and business leaders, including James Baker and George Shultz, the two most respected Republican elder statesmen in America. Martin Feldstein and Greg Mankiw, the two most respected conservative economists in the country. And Henry Paulson and Rob Walton, two of the most successful and admired business leaders. Together, we co-authored The Conservative Case for Carbon Dividends. This represents the first time that Republican leaders put forth a concrete, market-based climate solution. Thank you. We presented our plan at the White House 2 weeks after President Trump moved in. Almost every leading editorial board in the country has since endorsed our plan. And Fortune 100 companies from a wide range of industries are now getting behind it. So by now you're probably wondering, what exactly is this plan? Well, our carbon dividend solution is based on 4 pillars. The first is a gradually rising carbon tax. Although capitalism is a wonderful system, like many operating systems, it's prone to bugs, which in this case are called market failures. By far the largest is that market prices fail to take social and environmental costs into account. That means that every market transaction is based on incorrect information. And this fundamental bug of capitalism, more than any other single factor, is to blame for a climate predicament. Now, in theory, this should be an easy problem to fix. Economists agree that the best solution is to put a price on the carbon content of fossil fuels, otherwise known as a carbon tax. This would discourage carbon emissions in every single economic transaction every day of the year. However, a carbon tax by itself has proven to be unpopular and a political dead end. The answer is to return all the money raised directly to citizens in the form of equal monthly dividends. This would transform an unpopular carbon tax into a popular and populist solution, and it would also solve the underlying psychological barrier that we discussed by giving everyone a concrete benefit in the here and now. And these benefits would be significant. Assuming a carbon tax rate that starts at $40 per ton, a family of four would receive $2,000 per year from the get-go. According to the US Treasury Department, the bottom 70% of Americans would receive more in dividends than they would pay in increased energy prices. That means that 223 million Americans would win economically from solving climate change. And that is revolutionary and could fundamentally alter climate politics. But there's another revolutionary element here. The amount of the dividend would grow as the carbon tax rate increases. The more we protect our climate, the more our citizens benefit. This creates a positive feedback loop, which is crucial because the only way we will reach our long-term emission reduction goals is if the carbon tax rate goes up every year. The third pillar of our program is eliminating regulations that are no longer needed once that a carbon dividends plan is enacted. This is a key selling point to Republicans and business leaders. So why should we trade climate regulations for a price on carbon? Well, let me show you. Our plan would achieve nearly twice the emissions reductions of all Obama-era climate regulations combined, and nearly 3 times the new baseline after President Trump repeals all of those regulations. That assumes a carbon tax starting at $40 per ton, which translates into roughly an extra 36 cents per gallon of gas. Our plan by itself would meet the high end of America's commitment under the Paris Climate Agreement. And as you can see, the emissions reductions would continue over time. This illustrates the power of a conservative climate solution based on free markets and limited government. We would end up with less regulation and far less pollution at the same time while helping working class Americans get ahead. Doesn't that sound like something we could all support? The fourth and final pillar of our program is a new climate domino effect based on border carbon adjustments. Now that may sound complicated, but it too is revolutionary because it provides us a whole new strategy to reach a global price on carbon, which is ultimately what we need. Let me show you an example. Suppose that country A adopts a carbon dividends plan and country B does not. Well, to level the playing field and protect the competitiveness of its industries, country A would tax imports from country B based on their carbon content. Fair enough. But here's where it gets really interesting, because the money raised at the border would increase the dividends going to the citizens of country A. Well, how long do you think it would take the public in country B to realize that that money should be going to them and to push for a carbon dividends plan in their own land? Add a few more countries and we get a new climate domino effect. Once one major country or region adopts carbon dividends with border or carbon adjustments, other countries are compelled to follow suit. One by one, the dominoes fall. And this domino effect could start anywhere. My preference, strongly, is the United States. But it could also start in the United Kingdom, in Germany or another European country, or even in China. Let's take China as an example. China is committed to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. But what its leaders care even more about is transitioning their economy to consumer-led economic development. Well, nothing could do more to hasten that transition than giving every Chinese citizen a monthly dividend. In fact, this is the only policy solution that would enable China to meet its environmental and economic goals at the same time. That's why this is the killer app of climate policy, because it would enable us to overcome each of the barriers we discussed earlier: the psychological barrier, the partisan barrier, and as we've just seen, the geopolitical barrier. All we need is a country to lead the way. And one method of finding what you're looking for is to take out an ad. So let's read this one together. Wanted, country to pioneer carbon dividends plan. Cost to country, 0. Starting date, as soon as possible. Advantages, most effective climate solution. Popular and populist, pro-growth and pro-business. Shrinks government and helps the working class. Additional compensation, gratitude of current and future generations, including my daughter. Thank you.
So just one question for you, Ted. I'm actually not sure I've seen a Conservative get a standing O at TED before. That's pretty cool. So I mean, the logic seems really powerful, but some people you talk to in politics say, you know, it's hard to imagine this still getting through Congress. How are you feeling about momentum behind this?
So I understand that many are very pessimistic about what's happening in the United States with President Trump. I'm less pessimistic. Here's why. The actions of this White House, the early actions on climate, are just the first move in a complex game of climate chess. So far it's been a repeal-only strategy. The pressure is going to mount for a replacement program, which is where we come in. And there are 3 reasons why, which I'll go through real quickly. One, the business community is fundamentally parting ways with the White House on climate change. In fact, we're finding a number of Fortune 100 companies supporting our program. Within 2 months, we're going to be announcing some really surprising names coming out in favor of this program. 2, there is no issue in American politics where there's a more fundamental gap between the Republican base and the Republican leadership than climate change. And 3, thinking of this analogy of chess, the big decision up ahead is, does the administration stay in Paris? Well, let's pan it out both ways. If it stays in Paris, as many are pushing for in the administration, well, then that begs the question, what's the plan? We have the plan. But if they don't stay in Paris, the international pressure will be overwhelming. Our Secretary of State will be asking other countries for native contributions, and they'll be saying, no, give us our Paris commitment. Come through on your commitments, we'll come through on ours. So international, business, and even the Republican base will all be calling for a Republican replacement plan, and hopefully we've provided one.
Thank you so much, Ted. Thank you.
Chris.
So how was it? It's now. Today. Today.
Ted has lined up his support, and CCL is doing our part in forming voters and building grassroots support all across the country. Here's a short video reviewing carbon fee and dividend.
The climate is changing. Extreme weather is disrupting livelihoods and food supplies around the world. This is observed. This is documented. This is the scientific community's consensus. The climate is changing. Carbon emissions are driving that change. Emissions come from burning fossil fuels. So if we want to slow or even reverse the change, we must lower our fossil fuel use. By charging a fee on fossil fuels and returning that revenue to households as a dividend, we can do just that, starting a chain of positive effects. Fossil fuels become less desirable. Cleaner sources of energy become more competitive. The dividend creates millions of jobs. Carbon emissions go down, reduced air pollution saves tens of thousands of lives, and climate change is brought under control. We can make this happen, but enacting a carbon fee and dividend isn't in our hands, it's in theirs. How do we sway them? What can we do? We can use our voices to express political will and demand action. We must help our elected leaders work together. It's on us to tell them what we want as a group. Because when voices call out together, their impact multiplies. Government can respond to the will of the people, provided we tell the government what we want. And what we want is a livable world. This is what Citizens Climate Lobby works for. To empower citizens to connect with and influence their members of Congress. To spread the idea that each one of us can address climate change. Bring your voice to citizensclimatelobby.org. The climate is changing.
Way to get out of here.
Get a
Way
minute.
over.
There you go. Escape.
There we go. Sorry about that.
There was a macroeconomic national study by Regional Economic Models, REMI for short, a company that provides analysis for governmental bodies and for fossil fuel companies. And it showed remarkably positive results about what carbon fee and dividend would do for the economy, for human health, and for emissions levels. There's a copy of the report on the table. If carbon fee and dividend is enacted into law, we could also see these results. A growth in gross domestic product, 70 billion to 85 billion over 20 years. And the measures proposed in carbon fee and dividend legislation will save lives while reducing CO2 emissions to 31% below 1990 levels by 2025 and 50% by 2035 if legislation is passed soon. Now these numbers are a couple of years old, so we have to pass the legislation and push these numbers a little forward. So who supports climate action? All of these people, all arms of the military, former heads of Homeland Security and national security advisors in the industry, even numerous oil and gas companies. And in business, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, chemical societies, industrial societies, farmers unions, and petroleum associations. Faith leadership that has issued declarations on climate. Roman Catholic Church, Southern Baptist, Unitarian Universalist, United Church of Christ, United Methodist Church, Anglicans, Episcopal Church, Presbyterian Church, Buddhists, Quakers, Hindus, Islamists, and the Central Conference of American Rabbis. So do you think carbon fee and dividend is something you could support? Maybe.
I want to read the data first. And second of all, where is there ever a accountability of these figures if they are enacted? At my age, I cannot remember ever seeing when they said it was going to what was going to happen in 5 years, or 10 years, or 20 years, ever tracked. Another administration comes in, other senators, and it just all goes away. I mean, it may be working, I'm not saying it isn't, but I don't see the trackability of it.
Yeah, well, it's proposed that when the legislation is written, the funds collected from the fossil fuel producers will be deposited into a treasury fund called the Carbon
Fee Trust Fund.
Carbon Fee Trust Fund. And they might use something like the IRS, some agency that already returns and takes money
No,
from...
I wasn't questioning about where the money went. The trackability of the figures that this was going to, what it was going to cause and what not cause. I never see that. And so nowadays, especially with what's going on in the climate in the White House and the Congress, I see these figures. One time I would have just believed them. Now I don't believe them unless I read. And the time to go into that, and where do we find credibility that can, neutral credibility that can analyze some of this?
Well, the best we have at the moment is the REMI study. You picked up one of those?
Not yet.
Okay, well, take a look at that and see if it answers some of your questions. You know, because these are projections, that's about the best we can do. So REMI is an established group that does governmental studies and tracks stats. So take a look at the REMI study. and see what it tells you.
There's a question in the back.
Yes?
Actually, comment in relationship. One of the main key points was psychological. And if we look at the previous carbon legislation models that didn't perform well, what I'm looking at here is very exciting, what I'm hearing here today. And I think, we hear a lot of different numbers, but the intention behind a movement, and if psychological is one of the key factors, then those two are already highlights that stand above and beyond different governmental policies that didn't really do much for people.
Thank you. Yes?
I have a question. What determines who and for what amount these dividends would come? And how would they come?
Well, the amount of tax that's collected would determine how it's distributed or how much is distributed.
On a per capita basis?
Each adult in every household would receive a share.
Regardless of their behavior?
Yeah, we're even working on homeless people. How will we get it to homeless people? And each child under 18 would get a half a share, up to 2 children per household.
So there's really no basis for reward on your behavior and like traveling less and doing more ecological things as far as fossil fuel consumption?
That education will have to take care of that.
I see. Well, it's not as satisfying as it could be.
Well, it isn't, but what's satisfying is beginning to work,
Yeah.
to do something. Okay, so we invite you to join our work to inform the people of this island about carbon fee and dividend, and to build an informed grassroots base in order to pass much needed legislation when it's ready. Sign our sheet, we're passing it around, if you would like to join our group or to just receive progress updates. If you are from another state, anybody here from another state? Okay, well, you can tell your friends that the CCL website can guide them to chapters nearest them to get them going. If you belong to an organization and would like CCL to do a presentation, just see Ron or myself and we'll sign you up. To move this project forward, please take our information and share it with your friends, families, and networks. To save paper, I have a half sheet with all the links to every handout on the table. So you can just take that and go on your computer and send it out. And we also gratefully accept donations to carry out our work. We can take more questions.
So right now, we can't do anything except lobby. Is that where you're at right now? You're lobbying to get this adopted?
Well, there are many people working on this. There are people in Washington that work every day and on this issue. And, Ted Halstead is working behind the scenes to line up all of his support, talking to corporations. And we're gaining in building our Climate Solutions Caucus in the House of Representatives. And wouldn't it be nice to get our Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard to join the caucus? She's just recently written some climate legislation, so she's interested in that. If you are interested in sending her an invitation, there's a sheet on the table that with instructions to take you through the steps on the CCL website to send her a personal invitation to join the caucus. So I don't think I answered your question, but you know, all of when I first brought up the projects in drawdown, I said that's not enough, you know. So we're looking for an overarching situation that would take care of the problem like that on a larger scale. Not saying that it's going to immediately reverse climate change, but I think that this could be a very effective solution.
So suppose we cut out fossil fuel use, meaning gasoline for our cars and residual fuel for our power plants. What source of power for cars and the electric company do you foresee?
I think there will always be fossil fuel use.
The what?
There will always be some fossil fuel used for situations where we haven't really developed the technology yet. So it's an ongoing, changing, you know, evolving.
Yeah. So you don't see, how do I drive to Kona? Electric car won't go that far.
Take the bus.
Oh, well, you know, another thing is that you can lobby your local representatives and say, come on, we need more charging stations, you know. 50,000 more of us are going to be buying electric vehicles on this island. But that's what we're trying to do, to get people to step up, to talk to your representatives, tell them what your needs are going to be if you don't think that they're seeing it.
Yeah, well, the electric company needs fuel. We increase our electric use, they're gonna need more residual fuel oil.
I can add some knowledge to that. You know, my partner and I have an electric Kia Soul EV. It does not have a gas cap, no spark plugs, no oil filter, one gear, and it gets us to Kona and back. However, your point is well taken. When we got when we got to Kona, we had to find a charging station to get back, okay? And the car has about 100-mile range, which is just enough to do that kind of trip. The newer cars, the Chevy Bolt, the Nissan Leaf, not to mention the Tesla 3, have 200 or 300 miles range. Talking about how many electric cars, I haven't know the figures on that. There are about 6,000 all-electric cars in the state of Hawaii out of about 1 million passenger vehicles. That equates to 0.6%, very small, right? There are about 24,000 hybrid electric vehicles. That equates to 2.4%, still very small. But you might be persuaded to believe that that small amount is going to be an exponential curve. And that's what I'm hoping for. And by 2035, Governor Ige's plan is to decarbonize transportation completely, which means virtually all vehicles will be all electric. Regarding the utility, the big problem that HELCO has right now, they're trying to fix, is this grid modernization plan, $6 million plan that they're just embarking on. The big problem is storage. We get so much power during the day with all the PV panels, and then everybody gets home at night, the sun goes down, and they all want to cook supper. So there's this kind of peak supply and then peak demand later on. And so the key to that is going to be battery or some form of energy storage. And you might have read Elon Musk has just installed in South Australia the largest Powerwall bank of batteries anywhere in the world. And it's going to solve that problem by evening out. When the supply is great, the batteries get charged. When the sun goes down, the batteries provide all the da-da-da that people need.
And on Kauai.
And on Kauai, too, I might mention, closer to home. What I'd like to do, if I can, get there is answer another question that you asked about the reliability of figures, and I think that's a super good question. And the answer that I have found here, this is the Climate Lobby home web page, and it's just one page, it's got a bunch of stuff, but down at the bottom, there's a thing here called Laser Talks, okay? And if you click on that, Laser Talks are a focused little statement about a specific topic. Now, if you were to look at any of those, like for example, people say 97% of scientists climate scientists support climate change. Where the heck does that come from? Well, the answer is all of these Laser Talks have references down at the bottom. So you can click on that reference and it'll take you right to the source, which is NASA's website, And so all of these other figures about whatever are very carefully referenced at the bottom of each of those Laser Talks, and there are 58 of them. I printed them out, and I'm learning, I mean, like I said, I've been in this organization for 3 months, so I don't know all the answers, that's for sure. The other question about, the other question about determining dividends that the gentleman asked in the back. CCL estimates that to collect all of those dividends, and let me maybe just mention this chart over here. Domestic fossil fuels are taxed at the well, at the mine. Fossil fuel that's exported from the US is taxed at the well or the mine. Fossil fuel that's imported, I'm not sure, but I think Hawaii gets it from Venezuela. Is that right? A particular kind of fuel? Anyway, when it comes in across the border, it gets carbon taxed. So all of these blocks of fossil fuel get tagged at the source. In the US, if you make a carbon-intensive product, like an aluminum ladder, for example, or whatever, it's left alone. Doesn't need a tax because the fuel that was used there has been taxed upstream. What about if you produce a carbon-intensive good and you export it? There's going to be a border adjustment such that the company that does that will get a rebate equivalent to the amount of carbon that was in the product. So this product will be competitive in other countries. If another country imports a good to the US, they will pay a border adjustment fee to get it into the US. So it's an even playing field, either side, and not upset by carbon fee and dividend. And I'll get to you in just a minute. And let me just add the thing about high-income people, low-income people. High-income people have a big carbon footprint because they buy a lot of stuff, right? Maybe they've got a yacht. Maybe they've got a couple of Hummers. Who knows what they got? They've got a lot of stuff, big carbon footprint. What about the homeless person living under a bridge on the Wailoa River that rides a bike? That person is extremely carbon virtuous. They cannot buy a lot of stuff. And so when the dividend comes out, it will be totally equal. The billionaire will get $300 a month. The homeless person will get $300 a month. For the billionaire, decimal dust, forget it. For the homeless person, that is huge. So there's a wonderful kind of, I don't know, balance, I would call it. Yes, sir.
My concern, I guess, is with administrative costs.
Yes, sir.
Both in the collection of the carbon money and the distribution, which is, it seems like an administrative nightmare.
Yes, I totally agree. And that's, I think, a very important question. The laser talks address that, and what I've learned from reading them is that it's estimated that the administrative fee will be something like 6% of all the money that's collected, right? It'll be similar to taxation. How much does the IRS spend to collect all our taxes, figure out that everyone is correct, and then give us a refund or not, or whatever, right? It's a huge administrative thing. This will be simple, it'll be transparent, and the goal is to make it as cost-effective as possible. Right?
It's proposed that the carbon content of any fossil fuel is calculated by scientists, so this is the emission of carbon from the fuel, is what is going to be taxed. And already, carbon, fossil fuel that's extracted is brought to a processing plant, because you can't just use it the way it is. At that processing plant, they weigh everything in. So that structure is already set up. So then they fill out payment invoices or whatever, collected by the tax fee fund.
Somebody said to me the other day, to have this fly, it'll be a miracle. And I go, well, shoots, maybe, just maybe we need a miracle, And other examples that I can think of where Uncle Sam, love him, Uncle Sam sends out money to people, for sure, your tax refund if you're fortunate enough. Your Social Security, I look at the gray hair around Social Security, it magically shows up in your bank. Isn't that great? How about George W. Bush in 2003, we might remember, said the economy needs stimulating. I'm going to give all of them US guys out there a check. And we got $200 to $400 checks back in 2003 as economic stimulus for the whole country. Another example, what about if you're a resident of Alaska? Every year you get about $1,000 check from the state of Alaska based on the profits from all the oil that Alaska sends out. So is it too far-fetched to believe that this could happen? And I say, no, it's not. It could happen. Yes?
I'd just like to make a comment about telephone calls and lobbying.
Yes.
Because I've been doing a lot of that lately.
Okay.
And I used to train lobbyists in DC. So I know that one person, a direct contact from a human being anywhere in the country, a phone call in Washington makes a difference. Most of us probably have free long distance calls. All we have to do is pick up the phone and dial Washington DC and it's free.
Yeah.
The thing is, it's hard, they've made it difficult to find the phone numbers for these senators. They have not yet uploaded the current congressional phone numbers on one easy sheet, which I think people like your organization should, take them to task for it. You can look up individuals and call them. If you're shy about using the phone, usually you don't get a human being on the other end, you leave a message. which is easy to do. You write you have your little script and you say what you wanted to say, keep it short, and just say it and hang up. I mean, it's not that difficult. The first phone call you make is difficult. But you don't have to just call, but after that it gets more and more, it's addictive actually. You get, and the other thing is, all congressional people represent Hawaiians as well as their own constituencies. They are elected to serve the whole country. And so I point that out sometimes, but I just say I'm calling from Hawaii, but I used to live there, or my father was from there, or, say something like that. And I don't know if that gets discounted or not, but those people are there to serve the whole country. And we've got all Democratic representatives here. I mean, so you're not going to be doing very much to call them, maybe, but boy, I think we should be flooding Washington with calls, just calls. Anyway.
Thank you for that. And there's a sign-up sheet right up here. Yes, ma'am.
So your group is promoting what that guy on the screen said?
In broad brush, yes. Not exactly that, but very similar, yes.
Not exactly that.
Well,
What exactly
let me explain. He said, I think, that his proposal was for a $40 per ton of CO2. That was the figure that he mentioned. The CCL proposal starts much lower than that at $15 per ton, and it is, if enacted, it will increase by $10 a ton predictably every year. So second year will be 25, third year will be 35.
So minor changes.
Oh yeah, minor change.
Promoting what that guy
Right, exactly,
promoted.
yes.
What else is there?
The legislation hasn't been written yet, and that's why we have to form the caucus.
I know, but
And
what
they will
other
be writing
ideas
it.
are there?
Yeah, well, we've got
What
to
other-
send
sorry?
them our ideas.
What other ideas are there? Why is this guy's idea the best?
That's the best because it's very simple, it's very transparent, and it's very cost effective. And I might mention, in contrast, a supporting piece of climate legislation is Tulsi Gabbard's bill that was introduced called Off Fossil Fuels for a Better Future. It's like 60 pages long, and it would be wonderful, but it has all kinds of regulations and benefits here and taxes there, and it may not fly.
So hers is like that guy's, but not good enough?
No,
I'm
hers
very
is,
confused.
yeah,
very different.
Hers doesn't,
hers is very different. Sorry,
hers
Carol.
doesn't
Yeah.
return any dividend, right?
What?
Hers doesn't return any
No,
dividend.
it gives specific benefits to specific worthy groups. And that's been tried in Australia, and it was repealed in Australia because it didn't have broad popular support. In other words, not everybody benefited.
Revenue neutral.
Da-da-da.
Revenue neutral.
Yeah, it's revenue neutral. Everything that comes in gets spent back out, minus the administrative costs. Yes, sir.
I'm trying to get a feel on our question. Is the platform of CCL a platform which various things could be brought into, not just this lecture on the TED thing? Or is it primarily just promoting it? And if all of a sudden it was elected and it went in, would CCL still be there?
Okay, so the primary purpose of CCL is carbon fee and dividend. That's true. And the primary means to achieve that, I think, is the Climate Solutions Caucus. That group in the House of Representatives where you have to come in 2x2, it's not like Noah's Ark, male and female. You can be male and female. You've got to be Democrat and Republican. Come in twos, right? Let me just mention that the Climate Solution Caucus is now a swing vote. You've got a big block of Democrats. They're all big block. You've got a big block of Republicans. They're all even bigger block. And you've got this Climate Solution Caucus. Let me try to say this right. The authorization for the Department of Defense to study security threats to the United States was modified by an amendment which said, Department of Defense, you will not spend any money considering or mention climate change. That amendment was defeated. So Republican bloc, Democratic bloc, swing vote in the middle, Climate Solutions Caucus voted, and that amendment went down. So there's an example of a real positive thing that has happened. So, stay tuned, is what I was saying. Yes, sir.
So, let's see if I get this right. Under this, the carbon fees that are assessed, we can expect that the price of fossil fuels are going to increase.
The first year, the answer to that is correct. A $15 a ton CO2 on gasoline will increase the dollar per gallon by about 16 cents per gallon, is what I understand from reading.
And how about fuel for airplanes?
For what?
Airplanes?
That'll go up too, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah. There's no exceptions.
So the price to travel is going to increase?
Yes, sir.
Obviously.
That's true.
Okay, well, that's something
Yeah.
positive, because that should...
Yeah.
So the dividends are more if somebody's using more fuel?
No.
No, it's an equal amount.
No, it's equal.
Each adult in a household gets a share.
It's a per capita equal dollar amount to everybody.
This is a technicality. I'm just thinking of this homeless person. How's this homeless person going to even get the dividend?
That's a great question. No, that's not a technicality. So the proposal, as proposed, is going to do either tax records. If you file tax returns, they know who you are, they know where you are, and they can send you a check, or they can send you an electronic transfer, or if you don't file tax returns, there will be a form through social services that you can fill in and say, I'm who I am, I'm here, I don't have a permanent address, but the office, and they will send out an electronic debit card that you can use, and that debit card will be increased, its purchasing power will be increased every month by the equal amount that everybody else gets. So CCR wants to do the very best it can to reach everybody. Is it a perfect world? No. Will some people not be unable to be reached? Probably so. But does that help?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks very much, guys.